Good afternoon. We are talking to you from the Maria Grzegorzewska University in Warsaw, Poland. We are the eldest pedagogical university in Poland, and we invite you all in May next year to visit us for a large international conference, as we will be celebrating 100 years of existence in the location where we're at. So we're building a brand new building on our campus, and we hope it will be ready by then. So I make sure that the invitation goes out to anyone who'd like to visit Warsaw. It is quite nice in summer months. At the moment, we have a heat wave though, so it is a little bit struggling. So let me introduce my colleague, Anna Perkowska-Klejman, who is the Vice Chair of the Social Pedagogy Department at our university and a field researcher and the Polish expert on reflexivity and reflective practice. She is also the lead statistician for this research. My name is Anna Odrową-Szkołc, and I am the UNESCO Janusz Korczak chairholder. It sounds funny when you say it all together, at the same university, and co-author of this study. And I hope that you will find our study interesting, because we feel that it is the embodiment of social pedagogy that is all about socialization and environmental circles. And our research clearly indicates that this is the case, as different social groups reacted a little bit differently and had different level of fear and different activities. I'll tell you more about it, I suppose, bit by bit. So that's a big slide. We have conducted a large longitudinal study on COVID-19 and the changing attitudes of Polish people during different phases of lockdowns and releases. These were linked with government decisions and the reaction of media, who sometimes spun the information a little bit out of proportion, but definitely each phase of our study had a certain reaction that was visible in the statistical data. And we want to present these 5 phases of our study that were conducted online during 2020, attracting over 2,000 participants, and the research phases were to measure how the decision making and customer choices and level of fear and other behavioral aspects they are diversified by the socioeconomic factors, and our research showed clear inequality linked to educational attainment, employment status, and income, highlighting not only different opinions, but critical disparities in well-being and welfare gaps based on social class. Our research outcomes confirm that the social and psychological effects of the pandemic are diversified by different social groups, and this is an interesting resource for social education to look into a contribution towards development of inclusive social policies. So what is our theoretical background? We believe that all of us are framed by our environment, the social influences around us, and our research is embedded in Bourdieu, a very known theory of habitus, which is a kind of framework of behavior and things we're accustomed to in our daily lives that we take for granted. The way we speak, the way we choose our cars or sports we play or circles of friends we have, and that forms the way we think, our horizon of thinking, and our personal biases. We also worked with Michel Foucault, concept of biopolitics, how governments, and the concept of governmentality, how the governments are trying to make us think that our choice is our own, and that we believe that what we choose gives us something good, positive, and it's a positive choice. We were also aware of Althusser's theory about ideology and the state apparatus, how it impacts on our decisions and our feelings and thoughts. And we felt that these 3 elements put us in a certain cultural box, ideological box, frame of mind box, And to break that box, we need this element, which is reflectivity, that Anya is good at. And also, we thought that the situation changed during COVID, and we found ourselves in completely new reality, new space, new place. In fact, we didn't know where we are, so it was a little bit like heterotopia, because we were at home, but at the same time at work, but at the same time not really at work. We were on internet or in our computer or somewhere we don't know where, and all these words mixed up, and there were like soft boundaries between them, but really we were at many places at the same time, so where were we? So this was our kind of background for the study. And I'll give you some more information about the study itself. Anya was meant to present with me, but unfortunately she had a running accident, quite severe one, and we are very lucky to have her today with us. But she's not capable of talking with me today, so I'll carry on. So methodology of our research was, we used Google Forms. We used a survey online that had about 80 questions. We ran an open call on different social media for volunteers who want to take part in our research. They had to be 18 years of age. The survey was anonymous, and it attracted 2,577 participants altogether. And it was more popular in the first phase of lockdown than in other phases. And then in the last phase, the fifth phase of our study, the novelty and the excitement returned, and participants returned in greater number to complete the survey. So that was also quite interesting how people interest in doing the survey changed over this period of time. So this is the times of our research rounds. In March, in April, in May, in June, in October, a survey was usually open for a week after some major change in policy and major release of some media information following that state decision. So the first one was 16th of March when the state of emergency due to epidemiological threat to public safety was announced by the government. And people were panicking a little bit and were worried. There were cars going with announcements around the streets, leaflets were dropped. In some areas, water was delivered to the door, and there were all sorts of interesting occurrences. And in terms of numbers, at the beginning, we really didn't have huge infection rate. It was just a sort of imagination, the imaginarium, social imaginarium, that things are happening in Italy, things are happening in China, and our health system is not capable of coping with this number of cases. So government took some steps to keep us at home. And the first reaction, I wonder if it's on the next slide, was to buy everything that was to buy in the shops. And this is a picture of Carrefour store in Warsaw on 12th of March when they started announcing that there'll be a lockdown. So as you see, quite empty shelves. And our prime minister was telling on the news, we are self-sufficient, don't worry, we will have enough food and everything will be okay. But people were just panicking and preparing for the worst. And just to show you the breakdown of our respondents, as you see, in diverse age cohorts, we had different numbers of participants. Women were also more likely to take the survey for some reason, but in our statistics, this was mediated by creating these age cohorts rather than individual cases and the cases one by one. Here we have the breakdown of education level, and as you see, quite a large proportion of our sample was educated to the highest level, had higher education of some sort. So that shows maybe more time or more interest or more access to social media to take the survey. And also, this is the split of our sample into inhabitants of different locations. So we have countryside, small towns, medium-sized towns, large towns, and finally cities. And again, the city dwellers were more likely to take part in our survey than other groups. More than half, actually quite a large proportion, 37% of our researched sample were in some form of relation, in partnership or marriage. So they were not alone during lockdowns and during the pandemic. And we also asked them if they had children or not, and if they had any dependents, such as dependent elderly parents to worry about. And as you see, about 16% of our respondents did have. So here is the income per person in family. It's a net income. And as you can see that there was quite a big diversification in our group. We even managed to split it into very small groups of different levels of income. And 1,000 zloty, just to give you some idea, is about 190 pounds or 220 euros. And the average salary in Poland is now above 5,000 zloty, which is, oh God, my maths are terrible, which is about 1,000 pounds, so not very much really, but the cost of living is still relatively cheaper, especially going out to eat. And so what did we do with all these responses that we received in our survey? So first of all, we had independent variables such as gender, age, education, professional qualifications, etc. And then we had dependent variables. And what we did is we grouped them into indexes. So if we had a number of questions about for instance, level of anxiety, level of fear, we would group the answers from all those questions together into an index. If we had, for instance, questions about social capital, how many links, friends, like Mark was saying about circles of friends, do people have access to friends? Do they receive phone calls from friends? Do they keep in touch, etc.? We all grouped it into social capital of that person. Family was also part of it, and social institutions were a part of it. So we tried to link social capital to the other independent variables, or the other way around, independent variables to dependent variables. And we ran several different statistical tests to see if there are any differences between different rounds of our study, between different social groups, and between different social groups. So for instance, we used the t-test and ANOVA, and we tested the diversification in responses in different social groups. To interpret the existing differences, we used descriptive statistics comparing the results for different groups, and we used chi-square, I think it's called in English. So we used SPSS, the latest version from last year, and did all this analysis. Actually, Anna was doing most of them because she's better at statistics than me. And here are her tables that show that there is dependence, that there is statistically significant connection between those factors that I mentioned, those independent and dependent variables, for instance, in this case, sex, gender, with food supplies that people, the amount of food supplies that people stored, because we asked about stocking up special foods and water supplies. We asked people about avoidance of public transport, public spaces, and in this case, sex was a diversifying factor. And I need to take my notes now to help myself a little bit. So we also ask people about thoughts about COVID. How often do they think about pandemic, and do they think about COVID before falling asleep? We ask them what would mitigate their anxiety or fear, and if respondents declared high level of anxiety, we were interested what factors in their opinion may lower that anxiety. And amongst such factors, they listed more preventative measures, drop in infection rates and deaths, discovery of vaccine, that was at the first 2 rounds, complete remission of virus. They also could reply, I do not know. And many people pointed to the discovery of vaccine at the first 2 rounds. We also asked what helped the respondents in coping with the pandemic, and for instance, having a good social network, a good social capital was an indicator that people had better coping strategies. We also asked them about sources of information, about fake news, where do they get their information from, who they trust, do they trust the government, the National Health Service, the ministries, and what can I add to this? Men were more likely to stock up food than women, for instance, and to collect vast quantity of drinking water. Women were more likely, yes, and women, no, and still men were more likely to stock up food supplies. The food and water storing was more intense in the second and third round of the study. So at first round, some people didn't think it's the end of the world and they didn't do it. But then when the situation was continuing and further restrictions were put in, different strata of people were coming to conclusion that they also need to stock up on food. Age was also a diversifying factor. And let me find the notes about the age, which I have somewhere. Yes, age. Basically, the older population was more anxious about going to shopping malls and using public transport, although they were also more likely users of public transport. And they also tried to avoid train stations and airports more than others. People over 26 often said they do not use public transport anyway. So the older persons were more concerned about places of concentration of people. And this tendency was stable throughout the whole 5 rounds of study and 5 rounds of situation turns. And social capital consisted of family capital, closer relatives and more distant relatives, neighbors and friends, and also social services capital. And what's interesting, most people said that they could count on family or neighbors. Very rarely they pointed to social services in comparison to the first 2. And some said they can count on their neighbors, but that was also quite low after the social services. So it stands out that in Poland still family is first and then friends before other further networks and connections. The age groups, thinking about COVID before sleeping, the most likely were the youngest, between 18 and 25, and the eldest, over 56. And they thought about it quite often, but because almost like 4 times a week, and or up to every day of the week. The sources of information for the youngest people were mostly internet, whilst for the older people were mostly TV in Poland. And the youngest people claimed most often that they used professional sources, whilst the oldest people said that at the least. When the government or the media were putting in new prevention things to place, people felt more safe and felt relief. However, they claimed, especially in the youngest group, that the access to vaccines would make them less and less worried. And also the younger groups were hoping for the complete disappearance of the virus the most intensely from all the other age groups. Everyone was hoping, obviously, for the drop of rates of infections and deaths, about 30% of younger people were hoping for even more prevention and protection from the state. What is interesting, I suppose, that the more wealthy groups of our respondents, although they spent more money on supplies and water, were less anxious and less worried and thought about the virus less often. They also claimed to use more informed sources and shown a great disbelief of public services and government decisions. The higher education in our study was linked to greater reflectivity and more often answer I do not know, but also less anxiety and fear. What is interesting, the groups that you could say were, sorry, I've forgotten I had slides. Having children was actually a contributing factor that that gave people less anxiety and less negative thoughts, which is interesting because I would think it would be otherwise, but they had hope. Excuse me. And there was something else that was important and I don't want to forget about it. And I've forgotten about it. Sorry, I've forgotten what was the last thing that I was meant to say about it.
It might come back, don't worry.
But it may come back, yes, hopefully. I think it's the heat because it's 36 on the thermometer.
Wow.
I apologize.
No, don't worry.
The brain is boiling. But anyway, for us, we are still in the phase of linking the statistical data that we are sort of partly showing you a little bit of with media discourse and political decisions in those rounds. And we'll be critically assessing with critical discourse analysis what was said and how, and could it have an impact on differences in people's answering the same questions in different rounds. But we are still in the process of analysis due to this awful situation that Anna had. So I hope that by the end of summer we come back to it and finish this more qualitative part of our study, and maybe it will become more clear than from what I was attempting to show. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will take questions very gladly, and I will try to put our email addresses in the chat in a minute, and I hope that I didn't bore you too much. Thank you.
No.